Hi guys, it's Jonathan here. Welcome to this month's Pulse. And as ever, I'm hoping that this is useful for you and practical for you to use some of these insights in your daily routine, whether you're working for yourself, working for a company, or you're just curious about stuff. I hope this is a practical insight that you can actually action upon. So this month I've been looking in various different areas of research and taking automotive to start with. I'm fascinated with the conversation around whether hydrogen, solar or electric powered cars will prevail. There's an article in The Independent, which you have a link for in this email, around hydrogen fuel cells. And I'm super excited about CO2 free motoring. I think that even though I'm a fan of what Tesla are doing and other companies, I'm not convinced that the current electric strategies with needing giant battery supplies are necessarily the most sustainable approaches. Whereas the only byproduct of a hydrogen fuel cell is water. So, I think we should look carefully at that. And the Independent article that I've linked in the email is that's something that you should check out. It's super interesting. From a banking and finance perspective, there's an article that you have a link for in the Telegraph that actually is from a while ago around whether regulation will solve the lack of ability for startups and fintechs to kind of gain traction. And the reason I wanted to link to this is that it's not regulation that would catalyze cryptocurrency. It is actually the change resistance inside large established companies. And yeah, of course, regulation could assist some take up, but that's not the answer. And what's more so is in the Telegraph article, and even though it's a few months old, I wanted to link to it because there's this massive fascination of cryptocurrency just being about Bitcoin in many people's perspectives, and they've missed the point. And so yeah, we're looking kind of at Bitcoin and regulation, whereas what we need to be thinking about is whether or not with a distributed ledger we can more fairly distribute and at least more transparently transact. So that's what I believe. Anyway, from an education perspective, this month I've been thinking around an article from Inc.com. By the way, Inc. as a website is tremendously unusable nowadays. They seem to have massively chased down the advertising revenue perspective, and like there's pre-rolls and post-rolls and banners and homepage takeovers. Anyway, amongst all of the rubbish, there is an article by Jessica Stillman around what Elon Musk has been saying about degrees and whether they matter. Now, obviously the point is that from a perspective of skills versus degree, like academic achievement versus actual skill set, one is more needed than the other. The headline would lead you to believe that Elon Musk doesn't care about college degrees. What he's actually saying is that it's more important to have the right skills. Now, the reason I'm finding this interesting is because I'm a few months into my degree at Birkbeck University, and I am tremendously disillusioned with the process. It would appear that we're supposed to learn as much by rote as possible, these 5 chapters from this one book, and then which essentially is positioning the history of philosophy on the doorstep of a 17th century French philosopher. It's very different from what I expected. So I must admit, I'm starting to become a bit questioning of degree. I wanted to kind of expand my knowledge, and at the moment what I'm essentially doing is expanding my it's hoped that I'm expanding my ability to memorize the various meditations of Descartes, which is very different from learning or expansion of knowledge. Anyway, from an entertainment perspective, and I mean entertainment in terms of entertainment and media, I'm fascinated by the article that TechCrunch published. Again, it's a while ago, but it's still obvious to me that Amazon are absolutely dominating voice-enabled devices. And back when the article was written a few months ago in TechCrunch, they had 70% market share. And what the article doesn't mention is that the reason why Amazon is dominating voice-enabled devices is because Amazon is doing it in a way that is super useful, and adding the value on the stack much more than anyone else. So it's not about the device itself or the pricing or the color schemes. It's actually about what it does. And that's the trick. That's how you actually gain 70% market share. It's actually in utility and value as opposed to other parts of brand positioning. In the food sector, Brent Hoberman, who I've spoken at a conference he was the co-founder of lastminute.com. He's now the the executive chairman of Founders Factory. He is kind of advertising on a LinkedIn page around come and join us, kind of reinventing the restaurant industry. And there's, obviously in China and Japan, there's been lots of activity. I think the first one in China that I ever saw was 2006, 2007. Even had little blue and pink robots to define the male and female robots to the clientele. But this is an interesting point, I think, around whether or not robots will remove jobs in the catering sector. And so there's another link that I'd like to give you, which is a Guardian article around whether robots will kind of destroy jobs. And the Guardian article, which frustrates me to read, but I had to give to you this week because it's what happens when a journalist's purely basing the future predictions based on the past. And so it's saying, no time in the past has any of technology disruptions destroyed jobs, so it won't in the future. Will it? Yeah, absolutely. However, the journalist does have a good point, saying that maybe it will add some more jobs, but also hollow out the middle class. So it's a good article to read. Whether if you're thinking, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the catering sector, the food sector, but around whether or not robots will steal jobs. It's a great article, the Guardian one. From a health perspective, I'm fascinated by what's happening with CRISPR in general. CRISPR is something, gene editing technology is amazing to me. But I was waiting for this type of article to come, and The Independent haven't let me down by pushing out an article with the side effects mentioned of what happens if you're slightly off target editing actually can mutate DNA to significantly bad outcomes. And you think we've got to be really careful, people. If we're mucking around with nature, if we're meddling with stuff, one has to argue after all of these years of evolution whether there's a reason why certain things are the way that they are, and whether or not we actually can morally be okay with playing around with what has been constructed. But I don't want to come across as too much of a traditionalist on this, but I just would urge caution that we need to consider things like side effects from mucking about with nature as much as we're fascinated by the brilliance of things that CRISPR can achieve. From a manufacturing and logistics perspective, there's an article in the entrepreneur.com site around blockchain in logistics. It's something that I've mentioned for years, actually, but now it's starting to become more practically obvious to people about what happens when you have a totally transparent linkage between things. For instance, in logistics as the amount of miles traveled versus price paid. And that type of transparency and legitimacy and accountability, I think, is superb. And it is redefining the manufacturing logistics world. From a retail perspective, this month I've been studying the KPMG white paper about privacy, which is and specifically privacy in sectors which are predominantly retail in the white paper. The white paper is called Crossing the Line, Staying on the Right Side of Privacy. Big fan of KPMG professionally. I do business with them in one particular capacity, but there's something that's missing in the white paper, and it's missing on page 32, which is the 7 steps of how to consider your view on privacy. The step that's missing is the step where you ask yourself as an organization and as people whether or not you respect and care for the human rights of the people on the other side of the counter. Because yes, you need to think about whether people will tolerate your gaining of information from them and whether or not you need to reward them with something in return for their personal data. But actually there's a more fundamental step. So let's call this step 0 on top, behind or in front of KPMG's 7 steps, and that is whether or not you actually are also in the business of respecting the public enough, and starting from a position of respect and care and responsibility would then lead very nicely into the white paper and the 7 steps. Just my view. From a technology perspective, for the last 3 years, I've been fascinated by the Chinese State Council, who published the ominously sounding document called the Outline for the Construction of a Social Credit System. This China Trust Score is very seemingly similar to a Black Mirror episode, which is actually, I think, episode 1 of series 3, called Nosedive, around collecting, doing things for a higher score. Now, of course, the Chinese credit score is voluntary now, and it's mandatory from 2020. But you get to a certain extent where you would be able to hire a car without putting a deposit down if you have a certain score. You'd be able to get a certain job if you've got a certain score. And there's no real transparency around what algorithms are used in the background, but there is knowledge of the ways that data capture comes in. And from a technology perspective, I think it's useful for us to consider what that means in what we build in the technology world, and whether or not we actually are addressing this type of level of transparency and privacy. Linked to my previous point about retail, actually. It'd be an interesting one to watch, the China credit score, or the trust score. From a telco perspective, I want to talk about Google AirPods, actually, which is a bit strange from a telco perspective, but I was really amazed by the Google AirPods launch. I mean, I actually use a Pixel 2 phone. This is the Pixel 2, the standard Pixel 2, not the XL. Just as a point of fact, the screen is absolutely outrageous. The 2-day battery life is outrageous. It's fast and furious as hell. It doesn't weigh very much, and it's near as damn it waterproof. It's brilliant. And so the Google AirPods, I've been thinking, well, actually, that's quite useful. I was brilliantly surprised by the launch keynote, where it shows that by tapping on the edge of your headphones, you can have up to 40 languages translated. It takes about 2 or 3 seconds lag for someone to speak in a different language and for you to hear it. And there are some reviews saying the technology doesn't work that well yet, and it's only version 1 and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that this should have been done by a telco. If you're in the business of enabling people to be connected, why would you have not created a translation technology device to add to the value of telecom's provision? Because it's not going to always come from data services that you sell and the SMS usage like that. So again, we, and the telco perspective, happily watch companies not just move their cheese, but maim their zucchini. So from a travel perspective, finally this month I've been thinking around the Tujia launch, which is the Chinese Airbnb equivalent. They've just raised $300 million, and there's a link that I've put in here from the Axios site, but also there's another link which is even more telling, which is the Tech in Asia article around the differences between the US model and the Chinese model of the Airbnb type approach. It's fascinating, actually, because what Tujia are looking at, from not just in China, but also they have aspirations in other parts of Asia as well, is that there's a different setup. So in China, for instance, not a lot of people have spare rooms, but there's an abundance of vacant properties. So there's it's a different methodology required. Now, Airbnb are doubling down on their efforts to go into China and stuff, and they're not going to win there, I think, for many reasons. But I'm fascinated by the Tech in Asia article that shows you the cultural differences, and also mentions about, potential regulation, and you don't want another type of New York City situation where Airbnb were, totally taken to the cleaners in terms of what was seen as unlawful advertising for unlawful rental properties. And Airbnb maintains the status of saying, hey, we're not actually involved in anything, simply linking these guys to these guys, just a spare room to people. And it's like, no, you're actually not even a decentralized disruptor. You're actually a centralized company that's making coin off other people acting as hotels. Let's be quite honest about this. But yeah, so let's see what Tujia do in China, and I'm finding that quite interesting to watch. That's me this month. I hope this has been of value. And again, please try and see ways, if you like, to use this as practical insight that you can actually apply in your business. And I look forward to seeing you soon. And take care. And remember, send any comments to Chris CL at 10.io, who's the CMO at 10. He will be, he's probably the person that sent you this email on my behalf, and also it's a person who can take your feedback and comments, format comments or whatever. It's always welcome. But the key thing is that we're here to expand your thinking and make some actionable insights come to life. And I hope it's useful for you. Thanks, guys, and see you next month. Cheers.